are now.
Perfect. So if you're just joining us, you didn't miss much except the fact that we didn't get the red button turned on when we did the roll. So just a reminder, this is a work session and we'll just go ahead and get started. So since this is our first work session, what I want to make sure that I do tonight, or that we do, is accomplish what we think we want to accomplish out of this work session. So I thought what we might do is just share our goals for tonight and what we want to accomplish around these three topics. Does that make sense? Okay, Phil, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, thank you.
Okay. Did you want to start with what you had shared about what you might want to accomplish tonight in the work session?
Sure, yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think, one of the primary things that we need to focus on right now is just, communication of, what we're, I know that Dr. Penzarski had prepared a FAQ. I think that did a pretty good job of, I'm sure we're never going to grab every single issue that, we may have out there in the public being asked, but I think it did a good job, and I think that documents a good starting point for us of the questions asked and kind of the thoughtful answers to them. And so from my perspective, I think communication, getting a good FAQ document, and then deciding what we're going to put on our website, that's my primary objective for tonight, is for us to get a communication plan.
Great. Would anyone else like to share?
I just want to share, I really think we need to focus on unity. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding within the community, and words like that without intention, we did not intend for words like diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice to be divisive, but they have become that. So I just think we need to focus on things to unify us. That doesn't mean we're all the same. We're just unified. We're different people. Everyone has their different voice. We hear all voices, but we need to be a unified community.
I'll pick up on that because that was my first goal, was for us to come together as a board and defining the next steps for the diversity work in the district. And for me, it would be great if we could look at the near term, at least the next 3 to 6 months, kind of what that looks like. But definitely to assimilate all of the information we have and come together so that there's a very clear idea of where the district is headed. Because I think that's some of the misunderstanding, is not really understanding what's happening. I'd like for us, actually this is similar to Phil's, I'd like for us to determine how we are going to communicate with our school community. And I define our school community as parents, staff, students, community members, residents, really everybody, in our district. I think we need to have a plan. And also to clear up some misconceptions, whether it's through an FAQ document or a web page that we might want to develop, but to clear up what this work is about and what it is not about. And then also, in addition, how we will continue to keep our community informed with factual information about what we're doing. And then I had a third, which is about transparency, that I would like for us to determine how we are going to be transparent and how we engage, include, and collaborate with our families, students, staff, residents, our communities, and other stakeholders in our district. So I have a lot of goals, but I'm happy to see that they resonate with Mary Kay's and Phil's, at least so far.
One of my goals is with whatever we come up with, that it be as specific as possible, so there's mutual understanding of where we're going, and also that it be as grounded in the students of our district and their experience in our buildings as possible. And the work that the board has done since the time I've joined the board has always been framed from the perspective of what does the state expect from us, what are the standards that we need to meet, and then what does our community expect of us in addition to that, and how does that work serve our students. So to the extent that we can really make sure that everything we're doing is tied back to that, that would be helpful for me.
I agree. I would like to focus on what affects our students in this district. And in particular, I would like to answer any questions that Jennifer has and recognize that she is brand new to this job and this has to be like drinking out of a fire hose. And to the degree that we can set some parameters that are helpful and listen to both you and Ashley on the experiences you've had in other districts, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what you identify as issues, and creating a framework where we have time to hear from the people in our district and you have time to work with the people in our district to learn what our needs are. Did Phil just hiss me?
Phil? He's drinking through a fire hose.
Yeah, sorry, I'm muted, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. Anything else anyone would like to share?
I would love to hear your goals.
I think they're pretty similar. For me, I'm still in the, if you looked at my 100-day plan, it was listen, learn, design, lead. I'm nowhere near design yet, and I think some people want to be there, so it's still like that listening and learning stage and talking through what we've heard, talking through what we've experienced with our staff, with our community, and I think that this hits it. The other thing for me that was huge, that is something that I keep hearing over and over, is the communication and the transparency. So I'm really interested in talking, when we get to that topic, to talk about how can we communicate better, how can we relay the information in a factual way so that's accessible to everyone, and also how do we include them in conversations, and what are those conversations going to look like as we move forward. So those are the kinds of things I was looking at. I love the word unity. That was a word I wrote down the other night too. There is unity in everything I heard, to some degree, and so it's important that we build on that. Anything from Ashley?
Well, I guess my biggest goal would be to get direction about this coming school year and where the board would like us to go. I know obviously we haven't gotten to goals or anything like that yet. We're a little behind on that stuff. So usually this is the time we would start talking about that. But just on these items that are on this agenda to kind of give us some direction on where we're going to go. I know Dr. Pizarski is going to be directing the rest of the administrative team. We have some meetings later this week, so to kind of give everyone some direction on where we're going. I know the strategic planning was paused, and where we're at right now with a new leader and the ever-changing world, I don't know how much detail we can get into on that, but I think just kind of to get a general direction of where we're going. And then personally, just from my part of the job as it relates to public records, there are some things that I need to clear up. I know I had a couple questions from board members, and a couple things that I want to make sure everybody is completely understanding. Those are my goals.
I wonder if we could start with that.
Sure.
This would be a good time to talk about it. I know
The public records
Yeah.
clarifications?
that and public
I
statements.
think
right?
Dr. Pizarski, Jen was hoping to do it under the DEA
Oh,
agenda.
okay, all right,
Is that okay?
that's fine, sure. I didn't know there was.
I promise I don't have much for A.
Say that again.
I don't have a lot for letter A for the strategic
Okay.
planning because I'm still putting things together, but, and then we can move to the clarification. Does that sound fair?
Sure.
So, under the strategic planning, we had talked last time that prior to COVID, the district had been working on Destination 2023, I believe, and working on some revisions, and you had the learning profile and those different things. And some pieces that we discussed was to move that forward. We've learned a lot through COVID, so we need to revisit it based on what we learned because it was paused. And also, we had talked about pausing it for a little bit so that I can get better acquainted with the culture of the school and hopefully make better recommendations based on data reviews and getting in classrooms and talking to people. So kind of some of the strategic planning work is stalled, but as Ashley shared, district goals were not. And so this week I'll meet with the admin team to start going through the data, to start establishing those district goals. So what we did, and the team is wonderful here, they gave me the goals, pre-COVID goals. Last year was kind of survival, and I don't know that anyone really accomplished what they had hoped, except we accomplished a school year, right? We didn't lose education. So they gave me some sample goals, and I just wanted to make sure that these categories were kind of the same categories that we were thinking about. Not that these are the definite goals, but it helps me give direction to my team this week so that we can continue working based on goals you had in the past. So there were 3 growth and performance goals, academic goals. There's curriculum mapping to do with some of the grade levels. I think this year, I'm not sure English language arts is done or social studies, I think it was started, but again, 2 of those areas that were paused. And then they would do health, music, art, business, French, government, world history for a curriculum refinement process. And that's that district cycle. I think we've all seen it now 10 times of how Becky does that process. So that was one of the goals that I don't think was finished, and also moving forward with the content areas that needed to be done. Another area of growth and performance was you had done work with your DLT, your district leadership team, on working with grading practices and identifying the district beliefs for the use of school, grade level, department, how they implement grading practices across K-12. And I know that a lot of the professional development well, I shouldn't say a lot, I know professional development happened with staffs, and some buildings were getting ready to roll things out. But again, we got stalled, so if we could maybe think about picking that back up. And then there was another layer to this that we were going to talk in our goals to see how we could work and add that. The other growth and performance goal was the district will continue to refine self-paced learning options at the secondary level across varied disciplines, and identify refined purposes, applications of self-paced learning, and this said by June 2020. Now I think there are some self-paced learning options in place, so I think it's going to be really a matter of evaluating those if we kind of refine this goal and make sure that we're doing, that they're accomplishing what we intend them to accomplish, and to see if we can expand if it's working, right? So if the data says this is effective for our kids, then maybe look at an expansion. But those were the 3 growth and performance goals. Do you have?
With regards to the third one, it was before we moved to a sometimes fully virtual environment. And so I think that the administration's staff's experience in the last year would, for certain, change how they want to move forward on that goal. I know that the idea of having alpha classes was incorporated under that, and at one point there was talk of piloting some classes where students would be in person with the teacher, one on a certain number of days, but be in another room together in the building on different days, like working together or doing other work. And the feedback that I heard coming out of last year was that it was kind of two-pronged, right? It's really important for our students to be in front of our teachers as much as possible. And our students found the scheduling, the block scheduling at the high school less stressful. So they were a little bit at odds with each other. But for me, that takeaway was, moving in a direction, I would want to understand better anything that was proposing in moving in a direction for our students in less time, with less time face-to-face from the teachers before we would move in that direction.
Are there a few, and maybe I don't, maybe you know, are we doing a few blended learning? Was that the blended learning?
Well, I was going to ask, is this a, credit flex? I mean, is that what we're talking about, of giving credit outside of the normal path, or is this just an accelerating, it's just accelerating?
It was coming kind of off of the whiteboard, what's that called, the Clearboard thing that we bought?
Yeah,
right?
where they write the flipped classroom.
And there was a benefit from the flipped classroom of
Right.
teaching the students, using homework time to teach the students so that when you had them in class, you were addressing areas of content that they didn't understand versus teaching them in class and then they go home and they're struggling with areas of content on their own. So that moved then into maybe towards that end, it would be helpful to have them in smaller groups, and how would we accommodate that? And I still think that there's value in the flipped classroom, and I think that actually plays a little bit into the grading practices conversation as well. I just really I don't want to be in any way trying to set the course for whether you do or don't move forward on that third goal. I just wanted to express that it should be revisited fully before you bring a recommendation.
And we also, two things on that point. First of all, I think that the flipped classroom really has been more in the math department than anywhere else. And when we talk about acceleration or those kinds of self-pacing things, I think we're often talking about the math department. In the past, when we've done acceleration, there have been some issues with what happens on the back end. Like if you self-pace, what do you self-pace to? And there's never really been a very satisfying answer to that. So
it's hard for our students, although we have a College Credit Plus option. It's very hard to participate in classes in person that are not offered through Excel Tech or on this campus and remain involved in activities on this campus. And so originally the idea was, this is great, the students can advance at their own rate, and if they want to start taking college level classes while they're still in high school, they can do that. But the reality is the scheduling is very challenging to do that and not be fully engaged then at a university, local university.
which we've had one student do all the way through, starting in 9th grade, and I know we have a couple others from next year who spent the whole senior year because of scheduling issues. Like once you're in for 1 or 2 classes, your only option is really to go, and then they'll come back for maybe an elective, or they can come back and do sports. But and this may be totally different now post-COVID. I mean, maybe there'll be enough online options and enough asynchronous options through colleges that it will work much better. And that's why I think we're going to have to wait and see. Another problem is the college catalogs don't come out until after scheduling is done. So we're doing the scheduling from 7th grade through 12th in February, March maybe, and then the college catalogs don't come out until May, June for this summer and for the next year. So the kids don't know, you're trying to see where you're going to head and you can't plan.
But back to the blended learning options. Teachers who were interested wrote their proposal. There were ones picked pilot, and then we put them on hold last year with the virtual learning. So Monica would have all that information for you. And I'm sure the staff that were ready to go have thought through how, after spending a year of teaching virtually and in classroom, have tweaked their plans.
It was really the perfect test.
So we
before
kinda
you
had
move to the next one, I would just add that first of all, I think the way this is being approached is exactly the right way for it to be approached, which is for you to work with your staff, and these were what worked for last fall, but may not be anymore what work for us. And as kind of a side note on that, we usually have a district academic performance goal related to the performance index, which we didn't have last year because we were in the midst of COVID and we knew there wasn't even going to be potentially state testing or might not be as relevant. So I think we're at a place where we can transition back to having an academic goal on performance index.
Just so when they go to meet with the admin, then we'll look for that overarching district academic
Performance
goal.
index. Which is usually from the board level, a shared goal between you and Ashley. One of the two.
Yeah, I think.
One of two.
Well, I'll bring all this back, I hope you know, I just
Yeah.
wanted to know, but let me go over the last 2 goals, because you actually had 5. So those are all the growth and performance goals. There's still 2 more to work through. So one was, it was listed as goal 4, which was students first. So we wanted to align the multi-tiered systems of supports, which supported the academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students. It says it will be built and articulated according to the principles and frameworks of PBIS and RTI, and include the Ohio SEL standard. So it's all based on the work of ODE. I mean, required these are very similar things to what we did in my district, so I'm very familiar with MTSS and PBIS and all these acronyms. So that still seems
Is that
like
number 4 under academic performance?
This was listed as students first, it was goal 4 on this
Okay.
list.
Okay.
So I still think that's valid work because there will still be, we'll probably find when we go through the data this week that there are some academic gaps just because of COVID, whether we want to admit it or not, and so we're going to have to be very intentional to fill them. So I think that that goal, to me, is a relevant goal. It will need to be tweaked. Then the last goal was visioning. It said the superintendent will lead a comprehensive planning process to identify a district lens through which we embed practices which promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice.
Can you read that again?
Yeah, can
Yeah.
You lost me at the beginning.
I lost myself.
That's a plan.
All right, let's try this again, because it started with the superintendent, then I forgot. Okay, the superintendent will lead a comprehensive planning process to identify a district lens through which we embed practices which promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice, and justice. This is, remember, these are just drafts. So if we think about systems, I know the lens sounds.
The lens always throws me. What is that?
Yeah, it's just, it's the way we view the work or look at the work, right? So you can hold different lenses.
Okay.
It's just kind of that concept. It's the concept of picking up the red lens when you're scuba diving, so you
Right.
can see where the red lies in the
Right.
corals because it's not as prevalent. So what I think this one means is that they're really looking for a planning process to identify what are the district's needs, what are the students' needs, right? As it relates to this work is how I would view it, just kind of that visioning process, which will align to our second item if that's a direction that you want to go. But that was one that was listed. And while we're still on these goals, you said 1 of 2 goals for the district. Can you give me a description of what that second goal might look like that you want us to prepare if they're individually prepared? Financial
Yeah,
goals?
so one is academic and one is financial.
So I do the one and you do the other.
Uh,
Not fair.
But,
We work together, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that we'll write them.
but but coming from a place where we're constantly trying to support our, trying to say best, yeah.
So this was just a couple years ago that we kind of changed the direction of this, and we really recognized the need to align academic goals with financial goals. And when you think about strategic planning, we need to have adequate resource allocation so that we can meet the high priority goals in the district. And to the degree that those are academic goals, we don't want to be cutting programs that will impact student academics, for example. So it's definitely a way of bringing our leadership together to say those things are not exclusive of each other. You could never reduce funding in one area without assessing how that would affect the district's priorities. But the flip side of that is we need to focus on our priorities. And so we might be making recommendations to reduce funding allocations to programming that isn't a priority or isn't as much of a priority. If it's a fixed pie, which it often is, then we may need to redirect funds if needed. Or look at, so for example, we've looked many years in the past, we've looked at foreign languages and enrollment, also enrollment in certain AP classes, because we have such a wide offering that we have to grapple with, do we offer the class if there's only 5 students, for example? And that's great because it meets personalized learning, but do we have the resources to do that and meet our strategic goals?
So it's offering the highest quality education we can afford.
Yes.
Is my language.
Okay,
So we're
you're
good
so
with
much
that.
shorter, that's like so much more
You're
concise.
I should have looked
No,
at that.
I've only done this for about 11 years.
It's also,
so-
speaking in administration terms, everyone has seen those relationships where the superintendent has all of these ideas that they want to do, and all the treasurer does is say, no. So I think it's also to get us to work together to prioritize and allocate resources to the best of our ability to get the most return on our taxpayers' investment.
So as we work this week, because I think you're involved in some of this as well, the district goals, we can make sure that we're not straying from the overarching two goals. Because these will eventually become building goals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's district goals, and then the two goals that we're talking about here are our goals.
Oh, okay.
They're not necessarily district-wide. I mean,
There's
they are
these-
district-wide because we're leading the entire district, but
Right, they can't be
they're-
not connected.
Yeah.
Okay, that helps me out, I appreciate it.
And is there a reset with what happened with COVID? I mean, do we just pick up with the same goals we had academically, or are we assessing? I mean, I think from
I
my
like
point of view,
data.
really open to having to look at where we are now. Like, we probably are not where we would have thought we would have been had this not happened in the interim. So going back and saying our goal was X amount of growth, we'll just extend that out. May make sense, it may not make sense, and I would be really open to looking at that both financially and academically.
Yeah.
So the way we've structured the day is that we're going to do the data analysis dive first
Okay.
and really see what are our scores, what evidence is across the board in different areas do we have, what is it telling us? Do we have surprises, do we have new gaps, do we have new growth opportunities? And then we have these drafted just to say, okay, are we on target, do we need to pivot, what do we need to do? But I just wanted to make sure that I was on track with at least the 5 goals to say, is this a direction that I can go into the admin team and say, you know, at least it's a starting point for discussion. I may come back, I don't know if it'll be on the 11th or when it will be, but say, we changed things and here's why. Here's the evidence to give you why we did this.
And we're telling you, we expect that will happen.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's,
Because the
yeah.
world is
Yeah.
totally different.
I just
from
wanna
what it
add,
was.
all the summer program we did, I don't know that we'll have hard data on that, but, I mean, the instructors and stuff, I'd love to know how they felt that worked, because, I mean, we used a lot of our
Resources.
They're actually doing that this
funding.
week. There's another
Right,
week
so
of-
they did some early and they're doing
learning
some
lab.
now
For weeks, right?
Learning lab?
to,
Oh,
you
one
know,
more for my student.
to see how the students who participated in our, you know, summer
Yeah.
refresh programs, did and how
If that
they
should be
came
something
up
we
to
keep.
speed. Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking? Yeah.
Phil, I'm
Yeah,
doing a phone check to make sure my phone's not dead. Are you still with us?
I think he muted him.
Still here, you guys are doing great, I have nothing material to add.
Okay, just making sure, because my phone's dark, so I wanted to make sure we didn't lose you.
Keep in mind on the, sorry, on the summer.
That way, yeah, I can hear you guys all very well, so,
Let me
love
just
the
let-
conversation, keep it going.
Hey Phil, if we do lose you, can you call my cell and we'll just replace my cell with Jennifer's?
Sure, no
Okay,
problem.
thanks. That way we don't have to check.
What I was gonna say is on the summer learning, the learning lab that we did this summer, keep in mind that was funded with federal money.
Yeah.
So if that is something that we said, you know, yes, this is really worth it, and this is something we wanna continue, and it, you know, filled gaps, and it brought kids, you know, further along, with their growth, and it's something you really wanna do, it is additional money that we're gonna have to spend out of general fund.
That would be
Um,
an example of
right.
we need to find the resources within the fixed pie to.
Yeah. So, I mean, for now, we have the federal funding, but we don't know how long that, you know, they're gonna continue with
Well,
that.
and it'll be interesting to hear from teachers whether the gaps they think they're filling were COVID specific, or whether this was a typical level of learning loss that they think this particular tranche of kids would benefit from having every year.
Anything else with strategic planning that we didn't cover? That you thought we would?
You know, just one thing I just want to remind everybody. I mean, our current strategic plan is still our strategic plan. And I would just like to go over, I mean, I think we all know the vision, mission, but the things that we said, this is in, I think, 2014, that we believe in. So there's, I think, about 10 of them, so I just want to read them. We believe in high expectations, motivating for lifelong learning, providing a holistic education, individual goals, student success as a shared responsibility, providing a safe environment, purposeful change, embracing diversity, open and honest communication, stewardship of human, fiscal, and material resources, persevering through challenges, and teamwork and collaboration. And I think we can all agree that that's what we're trying to do.
Would you also read our mission statement again?
Sure, our mission, provide an educational experience empowering students to maximize their potential. And the vision, you guys know it? The vision is a little outdated because it said, within 5 years, we will provide a personalized education for all students. So,
And often in strategic planning, those governing direction-setting elements, like your vision and your mission, they don't change very often. So it's unlikely that we would change, that we have a goal to personalize the education for every student in the district. And I don't think we have any problem reaffirming the shared belief statements that you just went through as well, that we still believe those things. So you don't have to start from scratch, that's the good news.
No,
Yeah.
I wasn't planning to.
That's the good
so we're
news.
good shape. I just wanted to put this in my notes. I have it on this page, but
Take your time.
I didn't bring my colors tonight, so it's only I apologize. Right, purple, my blue pen's
While you're
out there
writing,
somewhere.
I'll just reflect, I love that you keep bringing us back to this listen, learn, design, and lead. And you're doing that with strategic planning, like right now you're listening to staff, we have some data we need to collect so we can learn from our experience over the last year, and then we design the plan. And I think that is gonna kind of govern all of our initiatives in the district.
I hope so. Anything else with strategic planning? You ready to move on to DEIJ? Or B? So what I thought we could start with here is maybe to start with the actual resolution that was passed, which were the initial goals. Is that this paper? Can we make sure I have the right one?
It looks to me like you do. Yep.
Because I think this is what grounded the work, at least where it started from. And I think that some of these pieces that are listed have gotten lost maybe. And from, we were talking about listening from what I've heard so far versus what we originally had intended. So just making those connections and the gaps. So do you want me to read it or pieces of it? Are you comfortable to start guiding the conversation? Or do you feel comfortable with it?
I think it might be good to read it, yeah.
Okay, because for me, I've only worked
It's
with
been
this.
a year since.
Okay, and to be honest, I've only read it maybe 2 or 3 times, but the Chagrin Falls Exempted Village School District Board of Education rejects all forms of racism and discrimination as being destructive to the district's mission, vision, values, and goals. So let me stop right there. Are the values those pieces that you read?
The belief statements.
Are those the values?
Yes.
We say belief statements, okay, I
Yes.
just want to make sure. We are committed to the success of every student in providing an educational experience, empowering students to maximize their potential, and that's the mission. We embrace our organizational responsibility to ensure that the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion are fully integrated into the culture, policies, programs, operations, and practices of the district. Our commitment includes that the district will develop and implement a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic action plan with clear and measurable goals, action steps, and accountability that aim to achieve the following guiding principles. To support a culture and educational experience in our district that is welcoming and inclusive for all students, and that will be attractive to new students and families, especially those from marginalized groups and those currently underrepresented in our student population. To enforce and enhance district policies, structures, and practices to prevent racism, discrimination, and inequities. That's the one I'm thinking, the lens piece, right? So when we're talking lens, that's the way you would view and analyze those pieces. To dismantle any existing policies, practices, or culture that perpetuate structural racism or discrimination in our school district. To provide high-quality, culturally relevant, and responsive curricula for all students and teachers. To facilitate equitable access to co-curricular and extracurricular activities, social services, tutoring, and enrichment opportunities. To implement hiring practices that actively seek to expand our job applicant pool to include underrepresented groups, to engage, include, and collaborate with our families, students, residents, communities, and stakeholders as their active involvement is essential to our ability to enact change and achieve district goals. It just says the board directs the superintendent and treasurer, CFO, to oversee the development of this diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic action plan and present it at the Board of Education meeting with an overview that includes plans for implementation and accountability. I think that's what happened in June.
Yes.
And Jennifer, the date on that, because that was before my time, what was the, do you know?
June, it was last summer.
June 17th, I
That
think.
was it, okay.
We
Got
didn't,
it right here.
there, I would say the plans for implementation,
June
the
17th.
accountability, the goals part, I mean, you can correct me if you, or, I would say the work of the task force led to sharing, asking more questions
Okay.
and sharing with the board, you know, a starting point, more than giving specific. I
Yeah,
don't think
that
the
was not an
feedback
action
was,
plan.
and in part because our superintendent was leaving.
Okay.
I wouldn't say he took the feedback, he did not take the feedback and develop a specific plan.
No.
We felt that it was important for
Okay.
you to transition and play a role in how that work continues.
This was also part of the strategic planning process that we began in the previous year. Discussions there kind of spurred some of this on as well. In that strategic plan because of COVID was stalled.
I'll just add, I think it's really important to clarify what was done over the last year and what was not done. There were no formal proposals, programs, or curriculum changes made or proposed. The appreciative inquiry process that was facilitated by the Diversity Center is really a process of recognizing what we do well and building on our strengths to say, how can we do more of that? To some people, I think it was frustrating because it was a year of defining what we need to do rather than actually doing the work. So we had members that wanted to, you know, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work, but we weren't ready yet. And that's why I'm gonna make this my new mantra too, the listen and learn. So I think what we learned was we need to do more listening and learning. We have no idea where we're at. We don't, you know, there's no way that any one of us could know the experience of any or all students in our district or all the families. So to me, there were 3 things that were nearer term recommendations that came out of that group. The board has not adopted these recommendations. It is just a summary of what the group felt next steps might be. And that's for us to decide if we agree with that. One is to gather more information, to understand our culture, our climate, the experiences of our school community. And as I said before, to me, I define that as students, staff, parents, community members, and other residents. The committee had suggested there are ways that has been done in the past in other districts to conduct listening sessions, focus groups, surveys. There's a variety of ways to get information, but certainly to create a comfortable environment where people feel like they can share authentically their experience in the district. And also it's a challenge to hear from everybody. So that's a big thing right there. Like, how do we authentically listen, which is, Jennifer, I think one of your strengths. And so you
I'm
probably
sorry,
have
can I
ideas.
just, for clarity, can I just stop you for 1 second? So we're now talking about the resolution which led to the task force.
Right.
And you're talking about the recommendations of the task force. You're talking about the task force, you're not talking about board action or
Right,
district.
yeah, that's what I said,
Okay.
the task force, because Jennifer wasn't on the task force.
Right.
To kind of summarize what the work was.
Got
That we did not, that task force did not come to the board with
Right.
curriculum changes or,
I just think
staff
because sometimes it can
training
run
or-
together, and I
Yeah.
just want to make sure we're very specific
Yes.
about, so you're talking about.
yes. And the board has not acted on this. Perhaps tonight we will discuss it and decide we're not gonna take action, but we need to incorporate this. The second piece of getting more information was to understand our policies, processes, and systems to learn if we have gaps that would need to be addressed. The second piece related to the structure, and like any strategic goal, the need to allocate resources, people, time, and money to achieving the goal to set it up to be successful. And I think some of the questions that the task force had were, how do we re-engage and expand participation in this work? And also, where does the work reside in the district? It kind of was with our superintendent previously, but is that still the case? You know, who do people contact if they need more information about this? And I think we clearly need somebody skilled to help us gather the type of information that we need moving forward. That's my own point. That's not necessarily the task force. And then the third was transparency and communication, and the need for common definitions, what this is and isn't, dispelling any political rhetoric that's out there. And that could be through a website, FAQs that Phil was talking about, clear and consistent communication, not just now, but as we move forward, so people feel like they have access to what is happening and that their voice is being included. So to me, that was really what came out of the committee for the next 3 to 6 months. And then there were some things talked about, like we visioned, you know.
A lot of dream statements.
Yeah, like where would
There
we
was a
like
lot
to
of
be,
brainstorming.
a lot of, high level dream stage, like wouldn't it be great if we had this? But I don't think there are any formal recommendations on
Yeah,
that.
that has created, excuse me, judging by requests that I'm getting, that's kind of the biggest misconception and the biggest misunderstanding, is that, there was a records request for all of the meeting notes. So, when you go into the folder and you print everything out, you scan it in and send it to whoever requested it. Those were notes from subgroup meetings, it was notes from the whole task force at times, it was notes from every possible meeting that anyone took any note and stuck it in that folder. It was just printed off and provided. So I think part of the misconception is that statements in there when they were in the dream phase and people were saying, their dream would be X, Y, Z, those were taken through the records request as these are board members saying this, which number one it wasn't, and that this is a direction that the board is going, they're doing this, so that is kind of, the biggest misconception is taking pieces of what subgroups said and applying it to these are board plans, and that was not the case. It was brainstorming sessions and things like that. So, and I know.
I want to add a little more to that,
Okay.
a clarification of that, because the misinformation sitting out there is.
Yeah, well, there's one in particular that I would like to point out first, because this one was actually in the paper and quoted, and it was, it actually, a few people brought it and made similar statements and said that we were changing the focus from academics to, I think the quote was, I can see the note, I pulled the note up from the actual records that were provided, that said, from the idea of success based on academics and advanced classes to the development of a more well-rounded citizen of the community. And I know several of you emailed me and asked me where that came from. Where that came from, I went through the 48-page document that was provided as public records, and it was from a subcommittee meeting of the Community and School Leadership Subcommittee, and the full statement was, it's on the second page of the notes from that meeting, so there were wishes, some definitions and some things that they hoped for in the future. Then there were some ideas of possibility statements, those were bulleted, and then at the bottom of the notes it said other points. And so this was the 4th out of 10 other points, and it said change the focus from the idea of success based on academics and advanced classes to the development of a more well-rounded citizen of the community and world, and examine what a successful student looks like. So I was not in that meeting, but I have heard similar conversations before about the fact that so many of our students think the only way to succeed is to be in AP classes. And we have people who go on to great success without doing that. So I was not in that meeting, I don't know that that's where it went, but that would be my interpretation when I read it, but that's only because I know that it was from a subgroup meeting, and it's, just looking at the label, that it was from the Community and School Leadership Subgroup. So,
Yeah, the
I know
only
that that was
time
brought-
I, as not being part of the DEIJ task force, the only time I heard that was at our board meeting the
Right,
other
yeah.
night when it was.
Right.
Well, let me,
And I know many of you were really concerned that that
Yeah.
was, people were, thinking that, that this board is not going to focus on academics anymore, and.
so that really bothers me because in the last 6 years, we've had two historically successful levies, which show community support for the direction that the schools are going, and to put misinformation out there and state that a subcommittee from the task force was work of the board could really do damage to our students. And I think it's important to clarify that the statement doesn't reflect the actions of the board in the last 6 years either. And I'm just going to read this because I wanted to put my thoughts down before I came tonight. But in the this will sound familiar to you. In the 2015-16 school year, the board set an incentive-based student achievement goal, which is what we were talking about earlier this evening, with the superintendent. The first one was just with the superintendent, it wasn't shared. To increase the performance index score on the state report card to a 108 and earn a letter grade of A. This score is calculated by student performance on state tests in grades 3 through 8 and high school end of course exams. In the last 6 years, the district's performance index has risen steadily. From a 103.1 in 15-16, they didn't make the goal, to a 103 that was the starting point for the goal, to a 103.8 in 16-17, they didn't meet the goal, to a 108 in 17-18, and a 109.2 in 18-19, bringing the district from being ranked 25th in Ohio in 2016 to 3rd in the state in 2019, which was the last time the tests were administered. And the improvement was driven by authentic change in the way our students are educated every day in the classroom. The administration and staff worked tirelessly to make instructional changes, such as allocating more time to core content, better availability of intervention during the school day, and providing teacher coaches to help improve consistency of curriculum implementation across classrooms. Delivering rigorous, relevant content has been and remains a pillar in the district's strategic plan in their goal to provide an educational experience empowering students to maximize their potential. And I personally value all the support that we've had from our community, of our schools, and just want to make sure that that message gets out there that the focus on excellence in academics is one that this board has taken very seriously and worked closely with the administration to work towards continuous improvement on.
So maybe it's these kinds of things that we can put in a communication piece on the website if you're hearing something over and over, or something's appearing, because I have a couple of those too that I think that we would want to bring forward so that anyone had access to how it's.
And
Yeah,
also, I think when there's records requests for things, I mean, it's all, when there's records requests, it might make sense to put them on a web page too, so that I think there's confusion that you can make a records request of you and that you're also serving as a librarian, right? Like, if it's already public, it's not your job to synthesize it and put it together, put it in a package, find it for people and give it to them. The records requests that go through you are things that the district has, which haven't been made available to the public.
Yeah, so the public records law, requires anything that we keep as a record is public. And that if somebody requests it, we would need to provide it, certainly. It does not require us to create records to answer questions or things like that. Now, sometimes that's best practice, just to get, to get people to understand things, and that's the easiest way to answer a question, is to provide things. So sometimes we do put things together. I know recently, one of the records requests was all of the reading lists for the last 4 school years, by grade level. Well, that's not something we really maintain. So what we did was contact all of the principals and have them, pull whatever they did have in their files of lists, and provided that, and that, you know, really weren't under an obligation to provide reading lists by grade level, because it wasn't really something that we had, but it was easier to create that and kind of explain and be able to provide, you know, what we did have and give people the information that they're looking for. So, yes, I agree, you know, if we're seeing, something, and if we're creating some sort of FAQ or some sort of page on our website, specific to this work, it makes sense. If I get, you know, the same records requests from more than one person, maybe it makes sense to just, you know, put it out there, absolutely.
And then also acknowledging that we are also bound by student privacy
Yes.
laws. So we, as a district, have to balance meeting the obligation to share records publicly with meeting the obligation to protect the identification of our students.
Right. So FERPA requires that we protect any information that could personally identify a student. So if you could read something and determine who was speaking, or then that needs to be redacted. That's common. I mean, we do that often. So yeah, that kind of information would be redacted on the face of the document before it got posted.
Thank you for the, I was just saying thank you, Ashley, for the inordinate amount of time that you have spent responding to public records requests. Hopefully we can clear some things up with some clear communication and try to get everybody back focused on the priorities of the district.
Yeah, one of the other misconceptions is, and I think we kind of already touched on it, but it has been in several records requests, is people are requesting copies of training manuals that are specific to DEIJ, or copies of, they want lists of all the PD that our teachers have done in relation to this, and that's not something we maintain anyway. I don't have a list of all the PD that our district has done, but we have not implemented anything as a result of DEIJ, so that's one that I keep clearing up too. So that's probably something we would want to include on an FAQ.
We're in a listening mode right now. We're not creating or changing anything, we're learning.
And just to drive home, the task force was a superintendent's committee with no authority.
Advisory committee.
Advisory committee.
You don't even have to take action
No
on it.
authority to implement changes or allocate resources, or any of that would be done at the administration and board level.
And that's the same with any committee. Our committees, even the finance committee and the capital planning committee, they don't have decision-making ability. They're advisory in nature. They bring information and they study information, bring it to the board, and the board makes decisions.
But I think with a lot of things that we do, when it starts touching a nerve with parents in the district, they're not aware of how we operate. A lot of people don't understand the role of the board or the administration, or how changes would come to be. So to the extent that we can have a more robust page that clarifies some of that, I think it might help assuage some people's concerns.
I would add to that, curriculum docs, we used to have them on the webpage. They kind of were there, and they were gone, and they were there for various reasons. I think
What do you mean by curriculum?
there used to be a link about 4 years ago to all the school-specific curriculum docs, because the way it works, as you know, is that you have the state standards, and then we have our own local standards that align closely, and they would actually cross-reference the state standard they were satisfying by age group. And you could go in and there'd be like English language, and then you would click on that, or ELA, and you would click on it, and it would show by grade level all this. I'm somewhat obsessed with this because I've done many credit flex things for my kids, so I've written it. So until about 4 years ago, you could go on and you could just find them, and then because of a bunch of changes that were going on with scheduling and some other things, they pulled them down to adjust them, and then they haven't been put back up, and that would list, it wasn't always book specific, but it gave you a really good idea, and sometimes it had reading lists, it depended. And then we also used to have teacher websites that listed links, and when we switched to Google Docs and everything went to Google, the teachers who used to maintain a website for each of their classes, which listed what they were doing in class, all got pulled down.
Put it in their classroom.
Yeah, because I used to go in and look at what they were going to read, and I'd look at what the standard was, and I think it came down out of it was when we were doing rescheduling and some things with the AP classes, and they just never got put back up, but they used to be on Becky Quinn's page.
I'm on the website right now, and there are curriculum maps.
They had the maps, but
The
they
maps.
used to actually, I mean, they were super specific, like it would go through it.
It's
and
the
it would say
standard,
K.12, and then you could look to the link, you could pull up on, on your screen, you could open the state standard and our standard, and you could
I
cross-reference.
didn't know
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
who wasn't on the board looked at that. Oh,
Yeah.
wow, okay.
I have nothing to do.
We used to get binders, before
Yeah.
everything was there. Oh, my God.
But they really, if you were a parent, you were like, oh, what are they doing, or are they keeping up, or like, I used to, if you get test scores back, and you say, oh, wait, my child's having trouble with this particular concept, I wonder if this is gonna pull through to next year, or I wonder where it's gonna go, or should I, go get a tutor, or you could pull up the curriculum docs and you could see it, and it was a nice point of transparency. And I think they were just taken down, easy to have them down.
Priority rise.
I think there wasn't enough storage in the cloud.
That was a lot.
For Becky's documents. Let's be clear.
I'm sure
Since-
Becky
since
can
the-
pull them up in.
Oh, I know she has, well, no, because after they came down, I had to do one of these things, and I called her, and she immediately sent me the file.
Right.
Like, I know they're there,
Right,
but,
to underscore that you can get the information if you ask.
yeah, absolutely,
People will
it's out
ask
there,
us,
and it's
we can
very
get it.
detailed, and it all links back to what we're required to do at the state level.
Jennifer, would you give an overview of our curriculum review process? Because I feel like some of the suspicion is that we're gonna, without letting people know, we're gonna change curriculum somehow, or that
And I want to make sure
a
that
committee of parents or that a support organization could then thrust, curriculum on the
While
district.
Jennifer's looking for something, I'll just start. Generally, it's a 5-year cycle, and every content area within 5 years
It's rotated.
gets rotated and reviewed. And generally, some areas are easier to do than others, like I would say phys ed is probably easier to do than
History.
language arts, okay. But so some take 2
Charlie's
years,
gonna-
some take 2
You're
years.
gonna go for Charlie tomorrow.
Okay, I don't know. Some take 2 years, and you have 1 year and it's usually, Becky Quinn usually leads it, and the department chair and many of the teachers in that area from all grade levels are in that. They study, they look at the current standards, they look at the, our curriculum and see, are we hitting all those standards? And then,
So that committee,
yes.
are there parents on it?
Occasionally.
Anybody outside staff?
I was on a math committee as the
Okay.
parent one time. I found it fascinating. I think I was the only.
As a board member? or
As no
a
parent.
Okay.
This is.
But that was
this
before
years and
Becky.
Years ago.
I don't
Yeah.
think she has-
I
she
don't
doesn't
think
have
there's
parents on
now,
it.
but tell you the truth, I found it fascinating because I was a math person. but-
I'd like to be on.
It was.
I've suggested a curriculum
Yeah.
board, participation, and she shuts me down every
You
time.
mostly just sit there and listen and be
Good luck with
that. What?
So it's
But-
staff driven?
Yes, it's staff driven, and they actually map, this is what we're supposed to teaching. Do we have a lesson that hits on those standards?
And they run a trial too, they run a class with the curriculum, like I know they did this with math.
A lot of times they pilot it.
Pilot it.
Sometimes they
Right,
do.
right,
It's
that's
not,
the
it's a
next
big
step.
change, they pilot
Right,
it,
yes.
it may not be for one book, but they
Right.
pilot
Yes.
it in a
And then
class.
they look at their current textbooks, they look at
Mhm.
other ones, and then we have people pilot, that's why it's often a 2-year.
And they present.
Yeah.
The team that she gathers of teachers usually present to the board a review of what they considered and why they made the selection they did.
And it's typically work that takes
A year.
a whole fiscal year, a whole school year. So it's not something that, curriculum is not driven by any of you, it's driven by the teachers and the professionals who, that's what they do.
And all the while, the books are being updated, like something that's changed in the last 5 years. They may decide they're gonna change from one math program to another, but unlike when I was a kid and you had to have the old book that someone had signed 25 times. Now the materials are, even throughout the year, updated, so that's a part of it as well. It's very,
So
textbook.
the team comes up with a recommendation and informs the superintendent. The superintendent comes to the board with a recommendation to change the curriculum based on the team's.
It's the superintendent's recommendation in their section, but it's typically the
It's
team
the
that
teams.
presents to you.
Right, but everybody on the administrative side is saying to the board, we think this is in the best interest of students, and then the board votes on it, we almost always support it because it supports all the all the work of our teachers,
The educators make the recommendation and then the board votes.
just the way it should be.
And Jennifer, one question I would have from what you said about the strategic planning is, will the curriculum, there was a pause because of COVID, which means now things have been crunched together all into 1 year. Is that gonna be, are we gonna just pretend to cut that year out and start where we were and pick up, or are we smushing things now
The
into
goal I
multiple
read
years?
had what they did to finish, so in the very front part of that goal was social studies and ELA, because there were a couple pieces they didn't finish, and then everything that was on schedule for this year.
So those were being implemented, social studies in ELA, my understanding.
I want to tell you yes.
Yeah, I
But
think
I'm
we
not,
approved.
I may be wrong, I
I
have to
think
ask Becky.
I think we approved new social studies in ELA curriculum, and then they were to be implemented at the start of that. They had started implementing them at the start of that year, and probably didn't get all the way through because we got on buses in March and never came back.
Yeah, and she has the cycle planned out all the way to 27
Yeah.
on what we're gonna look at each year, so.
Does anybody
I
want
keep
another water?
moving back so that I'm not in the
I
water.
I know, I
Sorry,
keep moving
you
back
keep
too.
moving back.
Because I want you to be able to see a
Well,
little.
I can. We're gonna be like smack up
In
against
the
the wall
wall.
in a minute.
That's why I pulled off to the side so you can see.
Is that better? Well, you like that. It's like when you're driving with posture.
How you doing, Phil?
Still there?
He's
Oh yeah, this is enthralling.
He's listening and learning.
This is very interesting. I'm literally hanging on your every word. No, you guys are doing great. Keep going. I'm listening to everything.
So I may need help with direction of how you want to continue this conversation.
Well, one of the things that I was hoping that we could get more information on is the social emotional learning standards, which were adopted in 2019. I'm not informed on, did that change anything in, well, you might not know the answer to this, but how did that, okay.
I'm working on an answer. I can't tell you I've read it yet. They prepared this for me.
Okay.
So, they being Becky and,
I think
President
Jen
Girl
Baker
District.
is pretty
oh,
cool.
Jen, okay.
So, is she here? I think so. We'll just drop her out and she can answer all these questions. No, so we actually have been talking about this, so just like strategic planning and district goal setting and DEIJ and SEL are all part of our admin conversations, because just like we're talking here, I need to talk with them and to learn. But Jen and I Jen has been teaching me where we are in the district and the different things that we've been doing. I don't have answers to all of the questions. I know some questions were posed at our last work session, but I can tell you that there are, and I think that's one of the misconceptions too, there are social emotional learning standards, and they were approved by the Ohio Department of Education. And so what I found in my previous district is a lot of it was already weaved in what we were doing in our content areas, right? So it took a moment to step back and start looking at what the curriculum maps that we were talking about, and looking at these standards and saying, where do they connect? And then you started analyzing, what are we doing well, where might be some gap areas, and what can we do? So what Becky shared today was that we could do, there was a gap analysis done, and I forget the lady's name, there was an assistant superintendent. Lisa had been working on a gap analysis, but we kind of glanced at it today, and it might not be relevant, like it's pretty outdated.
Okay.
So I think what I'd like to do with the team is go back and continue work on that gap analysis, and it's also analysis of what we are doing well and how that works. So I think this is just going to take a little bit of learning time and evaluation, because I'm not sure that we've revisited it. I'm not sure you guys visited it, to be honest.
Yeah,
So we need to go back and do this. However, there was work done last year on our need for people like our guidance counselors saying, we need a curriculum to help us do this concept. Or they had areas based on some surveys that you do for your culture and climate surveys. And we did those every year in Kenton, where they said, here are some gaps and we need some organized resources. So I know that Jen worked with teachers at Gurney and the intermediate school to look at different curriculums, just kind of like the process what we had talked about. And Gurney uses responsive classroom. So this is a brand new curriculum that aligns with responsive classroom. And what I wanted to do so that we didn't fall too far behind to getting those guidance counselors and some of our encore teachers support was to have Jen maybe present that at the August 11th meeting so that you could kind of see what that curriculum was, to see how it integrated. And I just want to be crystal clear, this curriculum is about the ODE standards and the work that was done there. This was not coming as a result of anything else. So I just want to be clear, but so the curriculum, I think Jen, if she's able, will present to you. It's a K-8 curriculum.
And ODE standards, you mean the SEL standards?
Correct.
Okay.
So she would present this and how it's
So-
built.
ODE, Ohio Department of
Oh,
Education,
sorry.
SEL, social emotional learning.
ABC.
Because we do
Rolling around
lots,
the
and we do lots of.
I did that today in
things.
a meeting. I
Yeah.
said PD, that's professional development.
Got it.
So anyway, I think it's really important that we do the gap analysis and maybe even use this as a pilot year. So again, we'd have to buy and work with the curriculum if we decide to do it. I mean, Jen needs to present it, and we need to have time to reflect and make sure it's what we want to do in the direction we want to go. But if we choose to do this, it would kind of serve as a pilot year to, I don't know, to make sure it's right, it's a good fit, it's an extension of responsive classroom and that work.
So it's extending responsive classroom through 8th grade?
Well, no. This product is an extension of responsive classroom. My understanding is responsive classroom right now is only at Gurney.
It is.
Okay, so this would pull it,
But we would still pull it
so
through.
this would be pulling through 8th, okay.
And I think that there's still conversations to be had with the middle school, some more in depth on how this will fit and work.
And is that typical of what you see other districts doing, or how responsive classroom is usually used?
I'm the leader in me person, okay, that's my box that we pay for, right? That's my, and Rachel and I have talked about the two, and it's all similar, right? If you do what's best for kids, if you believe in kids, if you personalize things for kids and make sure that all kids matter, all students are important, that's all this work is about, no matter what box you pick, no matter what curriculum. So she uses responsive classroom, I know the leader in me type, like the vocabulary and those pieces. This is something that builds on the vocabulary and the work that those teachers are doing at Gurney. What'll be interesting is over time, will we expand responsive classroom to the intermediate school and to those kinds of things? And I think those conversations are happening. And I think maybe you and I had talked about that vertical alignment.
Right.
So we're gonna wanna
Right.
see these threads grow, but I think piloting is huge, because what if we believe this is a very innovative, kind of fresh program, brand new, cutting edge, but if it's not right, we also have to be willing to abandon it. And I think that that's just education in general. You do your research, you do your vetting, but then you're looking for those evidences at the end of the year. Did it accomplish what we were supposed to accomplish? If not, why?
Right.
Was it a training issue? Was it an implementation issue? Was it that the content wasn't relevant or didn't fit? So there's a lot to do, but anyway.
We've experienced that. We rolled out a new
Math.
piloted a new math
Fifth grade,
program, and
vision
within
math.
a year, it was obvious that it was not the right thing for our district, and pulled it right away.
Yeah, Becky pivoted right away
Yeah.
from it, it was good.
And that happened. I mean, we just have to be, I think there's just, and it, I mean, just in life in general, right? We have to be willing to just have a
Try it.
little bit of grace, and
Right.
I think it's better to be willing to abandon something than to try to make something fit that doesn't, right?
And because, you guys would know this maybe, we've been using responsive classroom at Gurney for a while, or how
Long
new is
time.
it? So it's been there, I've heard that
It's
since around
been
five.
there since our kids.
So it's really, we have a lot of
And,
experience with
and it's
responsive
also
classroom.
not like it dies after third grade. I mean, there is a program, it's not the Leader in Me, but I think it's called PACS or something, is what the
Yes.
intermediate school's been using, and they
But
have
I-
all those words like
Yeah.
spleens and
Yes.
whatever,
Yes.
But I would like to, as part of that gap analysis, explore vertical alignment, because I understand that, you go through different age bands and the students have different needs, and, you can't be talking about something necessarily at the high school in the same language they used at Gurney. But I do think there's a benefit to, with regards to the qualities that in a student, in the student profile, such as the Gurney pride qualities, like not shifting that from building to building, and maybe pride isn't the right, like, I don't even remember what
And
the
that's your
P and the R are.
PBIS.
Yes, but something,
Positive behavior intervention system,
Yeah.
sorry. So I would agree, and I will tell you, working in Kenton, the moment that we had that aha piece that the more vertical alignment we did, the more powerful, more impactful. But choosing that right program for your community and the school that you serve is crucial. For us, it was Leader in Me. It sounds like Responsive Classroom is really well vetted at Gurney, and then how do we grow from there? And where does it grow in high school? Because I don't think there's technically a Responsive Classroom for the high school, so what does that look like? But I have a notebook now, so I'm gonna study this wonderful notebook in more depth and be prepared for the admin team meeting to talk about this.
and then present, that's
That
a
sounds-
quick turnaround,
yeah.
present on the 11th. and feel
Because
good
they've
about
done the
that.
work.
Okay.
So this is Jennifer catching up,
Okay.
right? So I'll catch up and figure out, make sure I'm comfortable with everything, which I think I am. When I looked at it, it's very similar to different other curriculums I've seen. And then have the admin team make sure everyone's comfortable, present on the 11th, but remember we would have 2 readings. So what I would ask is after Jen presents, collect those questions, collect that feedback, and if we're not comfortable, we can pivot. If we're comfortable, we move forward. Because I think it sounded like our guidance departments and, I call them encore teachers, so I don't know if that's a terminology used, but that they were expecting something.
Jennifer, you're probably gonna automatically include this, but I already have one question, which is what would the pilot look like?
Sure.
How broad is it, how long is it, that type of thing, which you may have already anticipated answering.
No. But I honestly know it will be across all the buildings because the buildings where this is definitely Gurney and the intermediate schools. But if it's all grades or not, I need to work with Jen and I need to see what that looks like. There may be some really, and that's based against on evidence and our gaps, right? So once we're looking at data, we're looking at those, and a lot of this, for me, SEL gaps are identified through surveys, right, through that climate, culture data, what we're seeing. There may be some really, some grade bands that just really stick out for a certain area. Maybe we're saying we want to target 4th grade, and I'm making that up. I have nothing right now at my fingertips to say why I might, but I think that's 4th grade. So those are the kinds of things to think about.
And how you look at the data too, because it's not just by grade level, it might be by student subpopulation.
Right.
It was interesting participating in the task force as a liaison in the student group when they were reporting in at the full committee level. Those are students that had started at Gurney during Responsive Classroom and spoke about a lot of things that the district does very well. Like it made me feel good about the work that has been done. They had some ideas about how things could improve too, but they pointed to a lot of examples of opportunities for inclusivity, especially at the high school level, that I wasn't even aware of.
And just from, I think there's one more piece for me to mention that I think really hit home today when they met with Becky, is just know that the curriculum vetting process for something like SEL standards looks a little different, right? Because if you look at the bands and how it's grouped, it's not grouped like a typical content area. So I just want you to know that when you hear and see the presentation, it may feel a little different than what you've seen before, but know that these content standards are a little different. And I know Sharon knows the standards better than I do, so if you need help with anything, she would be She's got her highlighted version that she keeps with her, so if you can probably show up.
Right, I would liken the social emotional learning standards a little bit too, because it's not content specific, there's not a class, but like an initiative we've talked about many times in the past, that reading and writing across the curriculum. Yes, reading and writing is done, that's in your, English language arts curriculum, but no, you want to enforce reading different types of literature and writing, and you want to write in every class.
My kids used to say
Even-
spelling
even-
doesn't
yes,
count in
people
math.
don't wanna
And I was
write
like,
in math class.
spelling counts in everything.
Yeah,
It
so I
doesn't
mean,
matter.
you gotta write in math class, you gotta read and write.
Right.
It's not just
It's not
numbers.
segmented,
Right,
it's very
yeah,
fluid.
Yeah, so that's how I envision social emotional learning students.
And I just watched a video, I think it was yesterday, that called the social emotional standards the soft skills. A lot of people had talked about
Can
it.
you say that again?
They talked about the social emotional learning standards being soft skills.
Soft skills.
And I had never thought of it in that way before, so now I need to go back with that lens, right? And say, how does this work or how does this look? I just hadn't heard it in that terminology, and that's something that I know that you strive for when you're trying to take your accelerated students even one step further to be world-class competitive, right?
Right.
That term was used a lot in the strategic planning brainstorming sessions when people brought up things like, they want to make sure that the school is teaching things like grit and determination and resiliency and things like that. So that was actually brought up a lot.
There was a lot of discussion around empathy,
Mhm.
teaching empathy.
Leadership,
Can it be, yeah.
citizenship, things like that.
I'm not the curriculum board member, but I did read the curriculum over the weekend. What struck me was the things that prevent you from being able to be a high achiever as a learner, things like your emotions getting in the way, or feeling isolated or depressed or whatever, those are going to be barriers to you being able to learn. So if you can learn to self-manage your emotions, like recognize things that might, and learn how to deal with that, so you can then refocus back on the academics. And so it ties in to academic achievement.
The PBIS, is the PBIS umbrella going to be part of this discussion or
I
no?
think it has to be, and MTSS. I think it's all interrelated, at least that's how I worked through it before. I mean,
What did
What
those
was
stand
that last
for?
one?
oh my word. So the PBIS we defined, so MTSS would be multi-tiered system of supports, I think. And I don't know how much experience you've had with the RTI process, or you've talked about the triangle, but there's tier 1,
Yeah.
which is your baseline instruction. Tier 2 would be like small group intervention. And then there's this really tip at the top that would be tier 3, which is very intensive interventions to help kids fill gaps.
So one of the questions that I'm going to have is thoughts from guidance around support of our students coming out of the last year and a half, and I'm seeing, as the question of what is the fall going to look like, and what are the mandates from the CDC, and what are the mandates from the state of Ohio, and then what are our counties saying? I think for a lot of students, hoping that fall was going to be more of a return to normalcy than they may be is, that's just has to be very challenging to process. And I think we need to be really proactive in figuring out how to support them and possibly identifying support that they need before we even see it in the students.
Well, and the impact of 18 months or so of a really different learning environment. We don't know how that is going to affect their ability to reintegrate into the classroom. And I feel bad for the new families in the district whose students never really got to meet other kids, and that certainly has got to impact your feeling, like you belong and being able to thrive.
And, onboarding of new talk about that and we think about what we can do for new families, we're also including families from the past year or the past two who moved in, who might technically not be brand new families, but who have not really, their kids haven't had the opportunity to be here under normal circumstances.
I think the newbie group defines it as 5 years. I
Okay.
could be wrong, but you're new for 5 years and then they put you out, you're not new anymore.
I think that's a community group, that's not a school.
No, I agree.
So I
I'm
think the
just
school
saying.
needs to, yeah.
It's a neat support group that they realized there was a lack in the community to welcome new people, and we could definitely do a better job there too, I think. So that, to me, answers SEL. Are we still,
We didn't discuss or that you didn't get to share about any of the 3 topics?
I'd like to revisit our opening goals and see if we met those goals.
Do you have those?
So I did take notes. Bill's goals centered around communication and preparing an FAQ. I think we talked about that. I think we kind of have our marching orders on what to do there. Mary Kay mostly said focus on unity. I don't know if you think we made a lot of headway there.
I mean, that's a goal, that's a high overarching goal for everybody in the district, you know.
If you put our students first, I
Yes.
think you're gonna
Right.
get unity.
Yeah.
That's just my humble opinion based on what I've heard. That's who matters.
Catherine noted similar goals, noted to come together as a board, and then define the next steps. So I think that part we need to maybe come back to. I think we know next steps on the FAQ, but not necessarily where we're going with. I mean, strategic plan, I think we already decided to kind of pause, let Jennifer learn, listen and learn our district, become a part of the culture, and then we'll pick that back up. But the one part of the strategic planning, the DEIJ that we pulled out, I think we need to know, next steps on that. And then determine how we'll communicate, how we'll be transparent. I think kind of starting with that FAQ, let's go from there. And then, if there are other ideas or.
And a web page on the website, is that what we're thinking?
Working, I think that's the way to go.
The other, I was just gonna say the 8/11 presentation from Jen Banco, I think is also a next step.
On the social, emotional learning standards. Sharon noted she wants us to be specific and grounded in our students' experience and not just students in general, but Chagrin students, which I think we're kind of all of the same opinion, at least it sounds, sitting at this end of the table, that students come first no matter what. Lori said similar focus on our students, and then you noted to kind of let Jennifer learn and become part of the culture, and you guys can all learn from her experience.
I think
Did I summarize that?
one thing that I might not have said is, falls under Mary Kay's desire for unity, which is moving forward with this work at a pace that's palatable for the whole community. And so I think, that's going to mean a lot of time for listening, in a listening and learning stage.
I also think understanding how interrelated these concepts are of SEL and DEI and mental health and returning from a pandemic and the needs of the kids, and it's hard to, I don't even know that you need to tease them apart. I mean, they're so pulling responsive classroom through, looking at those types of things, you can, by looking at gaps we have in the curriculum with the SEL, you accomplish a lot of things that may have different labels, but they're all interrelated.
Maybe it's an SEL lens.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm gonna get you a whole wardrobe. You can
We've got a lot of
SEL
SEL, we're picking up a
lens.
lot tonight, yeah.
I also think we need to maybe do a better job of defining terms, because I think the word equity. Equity in education does not mean the same as equity in other parts of society.
Our vision, whichever it is, for the last 6 years, is an equity statement.
Right.
Like,
But-
empowering each student to meet their
Yes.
potential is
It's
statement.
like, okay, I mean, here's, you know, you can Google and get all kinds of things, but if you Google equity in education, I love this image. Okay, you have 3 people, a short person, like me, an average sized person and a tall person. And there's a wooden fence, and on the other side of the fence is a baseball game. And there's 3 milk crates, and so each person stands on a milk crate. That's equality. But what is equity? The tall person could see over the fence without it, so the tall person gives his crate to the short person, and then all of a sudden now everybody can see over the fence. That's equity. But you can take it a step further. It's like, why do we need the fence in the first place? Maybe we could get rid of the fence. And instead of a wooden fence, you have a clear divider, or, you know, it's a see-through fence. I mean, that's what equity is about. You're not taking something away from people. Yes, you took the crate away from the tall person, but they didn't need the crate, so you're just redistributing, you're giving people what they need.
And we already do that with special education,
Right.
with gifted, with bridging, with, you know, we're talking tonight about self-paced, you know, those types of things. It's meeting the students where they're at. We're already doing that. I think it's
Oh,
just,
absolutely.
it's just
That's
a
what we've been doing
misunderstanding
it
of
for
what that
years.
means, and because,
Yeah.
just because of, you know, what's going on in society right now.
I mean, the 3rd grade reading guarantee, which has been around for how many years, is, the intention of that is to make sure that students are starting at a point that they need to be in order to continue to grow in our education system.
Yeah, I think if we, you know, correct some of this communication piece and get something out there that people can really, and get, you know, common definitions so that people do understand what is actually being discussed and what is actually being talked about, if we can get more people, if, you know, if the task force does continue, if we get more people and more points of view and more people understanding what it actually is, I think that's gonna solve a lot of the.
The other night did continue to inform my thinking on all of this, though, and, you know, I think a lot of people made some very good points. I learned something from almost everyone who spoke. But what was interesting to me was to hear several people coming from different perspectives, but speaking to fears that they had around this. And I don't know what we do with that, but I think we need to remain cognizant of it.
That's the need for transparency and inclusion, and I think we heard people saying my voice wasn't heard. So I guess for me, I think we're at a really good starting point for like the next month, but I'm not sure we've defined where it's going beyond that. Like, how do we include more voices? We're still gathering, how are we going to gather all of this information? And then where is the ownership? And I want us to get to that because I feel like all of us have been putting an inordinate amount of time and energy into this one thing which is so important, but it is not the most important thing in the district. And we need, I think that's because it's not clear where it lies in the district. So I don't know if we,
Can I take it to the admin team? this
yeah,
week
I mean,
and
you don't have to
start
answer
getting
that
input
tonight, but I
from-
feel like,
I think
Yeah.
that's valid. So tonight we might walk away without a detailed plan, which is where I thought we would be anyway. And that will give me a little more time to gather information, to do, talk to people. I got to see my first group of students, I know it's not on the agenda, at band camp. That's the best day
Oh,
ever.
fun.
Yeah, we're gonna have an exciting band.
Did you get
camp
rain
this year.
down? It looked like it was kind of raining. Oh, good.
I went to band camp and it didn't rain.
Wow.
It was amazing, but to see our kids and to start learning, I would just like a little bit of time to have some engaging conversations. I mean, I'm not asking for months, I mean,
No,
just
and-
let me, you know, get more input and
absolutely.
we have, that way I think that our decision, and it's not a decision that bothers me. I think it's more of a direction, right? How we're gonna move forward and work together and be more, I think the communication piece is easy to solve. We'll just work on our transparency and work that things are articulated clearly on the website. And like I said, I think we've shared, we're drafting an FAQ with those common questions that we're getting emailed so that people can just look and have access, and when something comes up, we can post it there so everyone has
Well, and it will help
access.
inform my knowledge and thoughts on this to see Jen's presentation on the SEL standards and to see where there's overlap, where there's gaps, where, you know, what it is that we're doing, where it is we think that we're pulling things through and where we're not.
And just to be clear, all this work is not under contract, right? So all this work is Chagrin Falls work.
Right.
It's our work.
Yes.
So I know I even got questions about that today. It's not under contract. This is
Contracts are
us
complete.
listening and working together. There's no contract with any group or
Well, and we
organization.
have a team already that does, you know, this is what they do, right? I mean, the curriculum development and all of that.
And there's nothing wrong with when more time is needed or you research and find something you're not quite sure about, to press pause and to step back. You can step back before you move forward if you need to.
There's a lot of listening to do
Yes.
and a lot of learning for me too, so, but I'll work on it. Anything else, Phil, you want to add?
Sorry, it takes me a moment to get off mute. No, yeah, I think that we achieved the objectives for the most part. So just so I understand, because I might not have heard this exactly, so the what exactly are we gonna do with the FAQs?
I still need to work with it through the admin team, so we're still working, it's a working document. Once we get a finalized form, I'm working with Mike to figure out how to do a web link or to make it really easy for the public to click and to access any information that they want regarding, whether it's regarding work of last year or when we start future work, posting that in a clear fashion so that everyone can have easy access. And I've looked at a couple other school districts too as well to see how we could do that best.
So yeah, not just creating an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with questions, but putting it on an actual page that's interactive, people can click and find the things that they need.
Will that come back to us for just a quick review before it goes live?
Absolutely.
Okay. In communicating that exists, are we thinking of like a one-page statement to the community to kind of clarify some things and point them in the direction of where some answers are?
Would be a good strategy.
We could use the e-blast, and
Does the e-blast to the community, or is that? what
it's
They sign up
anyone
for
who has signed up, so any
So we might want to do
email
a
address
push.
that you
I'm
have.
sorry, there's something changed with the phone, so I can't hear anything right
Oh,
now.
sorry.
Yeah, they're just far away and they're talking soft.
The,
Okay.
we were just saying that we could use e-blast as well to communicate that out, social media, and then Jennifer asked if the e-blast doesn't hit the community, which it doesn't necessarily, it hits anyone who is requested to be added to the list. You don't have to have a student in the district to be on the list. Most of the time, if you're on the list and you don't have a student in the district, the first snow day where you get the call at 5:30 a.m., then they request to be removed from it, but anybody can be on it.
Are there other avenues that we could explore to make sure it goes more broadly? I don't want to.
Well, it usually goes into Super News too, was that the
Right.
same
Yeah,
blast?
Super News is good.
I mean, there usually is a
The
column in
Facebook
the local
page,
papers.
anybody could access that, or even the newspaper, we could do something in a letter in the newspaper.
Charlene would probably be an asset to help us figure out
Yeah.
what's our best pathways to reach the broadest number of people.
Right, I mean, as you know, we can't control what, newspapers choose to print and not print.
No, but if it was an ad or something, or it needs to be our language, because that's where this has all gotten so messed up.
Yeah, we can take out an ad.
Something like that. I think, yeah, you're right, Charlene is the expert, so if you ask her, but our intent is to get very clear communication to everybody.
Charlene usually could write a column and submits it to the local
Yeah,
papers
right,
and it,
right. Gets published.
yeah.
And then the only other question I have with timeline is, when you talk to the team or looking at the next month or so, is whether there's anything specific to new families onboarding in the next month, anything that they identify as gaps or anything, because most of this work is, through the SEL and through, we've got standards and there's a curriculum process and all those kinds of things, but we also have, I don't know how many new families who move in, their kids have come in over the summer, they don't know, if there's anything there that.
I think I might need that too.
I know.
You are your family in the
I know, I need a
district.
little tour and some more pieces, but on a positive note, I did meet with the PTO president and the booster president, and so there were some coffees and teas that used to be done in person. Some of the principals had activities in their buildings already planned, so those representatives, whoever represents the different buildings, are going to work with the principals to find a way of how they want to do that, at least for the start of school. So how do we meet and engage? Now, that's not onboarding, that's a welcome, right?
Right.
So it has to be more intentional and fleshed out, but we can, guys,
It's a good
maybe
start,
talk
yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Getting back to that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, PTO has had a welcoming committee and sometimes they will assign people. I mean, I don't know how it's working these days, but it depends on how many volunteers they have, where they will, be assigned some new people to call. But I think a good reminder, what Lori said before, don't just welcome the people who moved in this year, you gotta go back a year.
Anything else that we would like to cover on these three topics? Not for me.
All right, with that, I'd like to announce our next meeting, which will be Wednesday, August 11th, 2021 at 6 p.m. in this room. And may I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Burrows, seconded by Lori Bendel, by Ms. Bendel. Ashley?
Mr. Rankin, I am not ignoring you, but because you are not in person, you cannot vote.
What's that, sorry?
You're not going to vote on the adjournment. Thank you for joining us, Phil.
Yeah, no problem, thanks for including me.
Drive safe.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. Bennell.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
House. Power meeting. This is so near and dear to my heart. I know that. Thank you.
Good, how are you? Yeah. Good to see you.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Got it.
If I turn this off.